reality probably isn't what you were told it is. From the moment you opened your eyes in this world, people started handing you lenses. Parents, teachers, media, culture. Each one saying, this is how things work. This is what's real. This is who you are. But those lenses explained life in fragments. Psychology over here, religion over there, science in another corner, your emotions in a box you're supposed to manage. You were given pieces, but not the framework that ties everything together. The Hermetic tradition points toward that underlying framework. Not as a religion, not as a belief system you're supposed to accept on faith, but as a set of principles, patterns that describe how reality behaves, whether you've heard of them or not. Think of them less like commandments and more like natural laws. You don't have to believe in gravity for it to pull you down. In the same way, these principles don't wait for your permission. They're already operating. All you can really choose is whether you stay blind to them or begin to observe how they're already shaping your life. So imagine we're sitting together, not in a temple or a classroom, but somewhere quiet. This isn't about being mystical for the sake of it. It's about testing a different lens and seeing if it explains your experience more honestly than the one you were given. Start with your own mind. Imagine that everything you experience is happening on a screen. Every thought, memory, sensation, emotion, everything appears on that screen. That screen is your awareness. The Hermetic principle of mentalism says, all is mind. It isn't telling you that the physical world is fake or that you can think your way out of every difficulty. It's pointing to something simpler and deeper. Anything that becomes part of your reality has to pass through consciousness first. Your inner world is not a side story. It's the operating system that everything else runs on. You don't just live in the world passively. The world, as you experience it, lives in you. That's why two people can walk through the same event and come away with completely different realities. One person sees proof that life is cruel and pointless. The other sees a challenge, an initiation, or a turning point. The event is the same. The meaning is different. The difference is the lens of mind. Here's where it becomes uncomfortable. Most of the code running that inner operating system is not your own. Before you could choose anything for yourself, you were programmed. You absorbed beliefs like, life is hard, I'm not good enough, people can't be trusted, money is dirty, I always mess things up. They might have sounded like observations, but they were actually instructions. Your mind treated them like blueprints and started quietly building a reality to match. You act from those beliefs. You filter opportunities through them. You pick relationships, jobs, and habits based on them. Then life reflects them back to you, like a mirror with perfect memory. You look at the reflection and say, see? That proves it. I was right about myself all along. But what you're really seeing is the echo of an unexamined script. Mentalism doesn't ask you to accept blame for everything that's ever happened to you. It asks you to recognize something far more powerful. You cannot change the mirror by shouting at it. You change the mirror by changing the source. That is what inner work really is. Meditation, journaling, therapy, shadow work, honest self-inquiry. These are not optional extras if this principle is true. They are system updates. Modern science, psychology, and neuroscience all circle around similar ideas. The observer matters. Attention changes outcomes. Expectation influences behavior. Interpretations differ, but the pattern is there. What you consistently hold in mind affects where you look, how you act, and what you notice. Mentalism boils that down into one core insight. Your mind is not just another tool. It is the central interface between you and reality. When you change the architecture of that mind, the structure of your life starts to shift with it. Now follow that thought a little further. If your mind is the operating system, what is the relationship between your inner world and what shows up outside of you? You've probably heard the phrase, as above, so below, as within, so without. It sounds poetic and mysterious, but in Hermetic teaching, this is the principle of correspondence. It says that patterns repeat across different scales. The outer reflects the inner. The visible reflects the invisible. What plays out in your circumstances often echoes what's happening inside you. You can see this in nature. A galaxy spirals in a way that looks strikingly similar to a hurricane. The branching pattern of trees resembles the branching in your lungs, or the network of rivers across land. Different sizes, same kind of structure. The same blueprint shows up again and again. Now shrink that pattern down to the scale of your own life. If your relationships are constant battlegrounds, that outer conflict may correspond to unresolved conflict within yourself. If your work feels hollow and lifeless, that might reflect a deeper disconnect from your own values and desires. If everything feels like a grind, there may be an internal story rooted in scarcity, struggle, or unworthiness that's shaping how you move. Correspondence doesn't exist to make you feel guilty about what's happening. It exists so you can use your life as feedback. Instead of only asking, why is this happening to me? You start asking, what is this showing me about my own state? Just as cleaning a mirror doesn't change your face, rearranging your entire outer world without touching the inner pattern rarely creates lasting change. The principle works in both directions. Outer chaos often reflects inner chaos, but inner order tends to ripple outward. When you begin to organize your thinking, your emotions, your intentions, even your physical environment, you slowly see that your external experience starts to mirror that coherence. Not overnight, not as magic, but as structure doing what structure does. The same intelligence that shapes galaxies is, in this view, shaping the smallest details of your life. You're not separate from the pattern. You are a living instance of it. When you begin to see your experience that way, reality stops feeling random and starts feeling strangely intimate. Every person becomes a mirror. Every challenge becomes a message. Every moment becomes a reading of your own inner state. That naturally leads into the next lens, how everything moves. At the surface, a rock seems still. A wall doesn't appear to be doing anything. But on a deeper level, atoms vibrate, molecules move, energy pulses. The Hermetic principle of vibration says that nothing rests. Everything moves. Everything vibrates. This isn't just a motivational line. It's a way of understanding experience. Your body is always in motion. Your nervous system is always signaling. Thoughts are firing in patterns. Emotions rise, peak, and fall as waves of energy passing through you. All of this together creates what you could think of as a general frequency, the overall feel of your state at any given moment. When you're stuck in fear, shame, resentment, or chronic stress, you're tuned to a certain quality of experience. Your thoughts narrow. Your outlook becomes darker. You interpret neutral events as threats. You see fewer options. You tend to meet people and situations from a place of defense. That station feels heavy and closed, and life seems to echo that back to you. When you shift into gratitude, creativity, courage, or grounded confidence, something very different happens. Your perception widens. You notice chances you would have ignored. You approach conversations differently. You solve problems more fluidly. The world may not have changed, but your way of meeting it has. And so the experience you have of it changes too. Your state is not fixed. It fluctuates all the time, and that fluctuation can be influenced. Breath can change your state. Movement can change it. The stories you tell yourself, the people you spend time around, the information you consume, the music you listen to, all of it nudges your frequency up or down. Raising your vibration is not about pretending everything is fine when it isn't. It's not about forcing positive thoughts and ignoring pain. That's just another layer of denial. True elevation is emotional and mental honesty combined with sovereignty. You feel what you feel, but you don't get swallowed by it. You notice your thoughts, but you don't assume every one of them tells the truth. You start choosing what you feed your system: food, content, conversations, knowing that you're tuning yourself with each choice. Once you start viewing yourself as a tuning instrument, you become less willing to let randomness, drama, or constant fear programming set your tone. You stop waiting for the world to cheer you up and begin learning how to shift your own state, even a little. And over time, those small shifts change where you tend to live, emotionally and mentally. Life still presents challenges, but you're meeting them from a different level, and that matters. Now think about how those states show up as opposites. Confidence and insecurity, hope and despair, love and hate, clarity and confusion. The Hermetic principle of polarity says that everything exists in pairs, and that these apparent opposites are actually the same thing expressed in different degrees. Hot and cold are both temperature. High and low are both positions on the same line. Light and dark are about the presence or absence of illumination. Love and hate, as intense emotional states, sit close together on the spectrum of connection. The important insight is this: if something exists on a spectrum, you are rarely stuck. You're just at a specific point along that line. You are not either completely fearless or completely broken. You're somewhere between fear and courage, and that position can shift. You are not either fully enlightened or utterly lost. You're somewhere between confusion and clarity, and that position can shift too. That means change often isn't about leaping from one extreme to another. It's about small adjustments, from despair to a flicker of curiosity, from rage to honest grief, from shame to a little more understanding, from numbness to a faint willingness to care again. Each movement is a degree on the spectrum, and those degrees matter. Polarity also helps you see how easily you can be manipulated when you only look at extremes. So much of our public life is framed as opposites: left versus right, us versus them, all good versus all bad. When you understand polarity, you recognize that most of what you're being asked to choose between are just points along a continuum. That understanding gives you room. You're less likely to get dragged to the far ends of the spectrum, and more likely to stay connected to your own center. On a personal level, this principle turns your negative states into raw material instead of verdicts. Fear becomes something you can slowly tilt into courage. Resentment can be nudged toward insight. Scarcity can be transmuted into creativity. That process of shifting is a kind of inner alchemy. You don't erase one pole. You learn to move along the line toward what serves you and others more deeply. If polarity shows you the spectrum, the next principle shows you the motion of your life across it. The Hermetic principle of rhythm says that everything moves in cycles. There are tides in all things, a pendulum swinging between two poles. You see this everywhere. Breath in and breath out, day turning into night, seasons changing, emotional highs and lows, periods of growth followed by periods of consolidation or rest, even the rise and fall of entire civilizations. Yet many of us have been taught to treat these natural swings as personal failures. When we're up, inspired, energized, clear, we try to hold on forever, as if any dip means disaster. When we're down, tired, confused, grieving, we assume something is wrong with us, and we scramble to escape the feeling as quickly as possible. But if rhythm is a law, those swings aren't punishments. They're patterns. Your nervous system cannot sprint endlessly. Your mind cannot process new experiences without time to integrate. Your heart cannot stay wide open without ever closing a little to rest and heal. When you ignore rhythm and live as if you're a machine, you run yourself into the ground. Burnout, numbness, anxiety, chronic fatigue, these often show up when you insist on straight-line performance in a world built on waves. When you work with rhythm, your expectations shift. You start to notice your own patterns, which times of day or year you feel most creative, and which times you naturally feel more inward or reflective. You stop treating every low-energy phase as a moral failure, and instead ask, what is this phase for? The same pattern plays out on collective levels. History swings between expansion and contraction, freedom and control, clarity and confusion. Seeing this doesn't mean you shrug and accept whatever happens. It means you don't lose your center every time the pendulum moves. You understand that there will be pushes forward and pushes back, and that your job is to remain anchored enough to act wisely in both. The Hermetic ideal here is not to stop the pendulum. It's to find your center while it moves. You still feel joy and grief, motivation and fatigue, hope and doubt. But you're not constantly confusing every low with total collapse and every high with permanent arrival. Life stops feeling like a wild ride you're trapped on and starts to feel more like a dance with changing tempos. Now bring in the next piece. The principle of cause and effect says that every effect has a cause, and every cause has an effect. This doesn't mean you consciously choose every event that happens to you. It doesn't erase injustice, accidents, or the impact of other people's decisions. What it does say is that the patterns that repeat in your life are not completely random. Something is feeding them. Your beliefs, habits, emotional reactions, attention, and assumptions all act as causes. Over time, they produce effects. If a hidden belief says, "I'm not worthy of love," that inner cause can show up as repeatedly choosing partners who treat you badly, pushing away people who are good for you, or settling for dynamics that hurt you. If a belief says, "I'm destined to struggle," you might overlook opportunities, downplay your abilities, or sabotage progress anytime things begin to improve. From the outside, this looks like bad luck. From the inside, it's a chain of causes that hasn't been brought into awareness yet. This principle asks for radical responsibility. Responsibility is not the same as blame. You are not being told that you caused every painful thing that happened to you. But once an event is in your past, your response becomes a cause. Your story about it becomes a cause. How you carry it into the present becomes a cause. What you choose to do next becomes a cause. When you see that, you begin to move out of pure reactivity. Instead of only saying, "Why does this keep happening to me?" you start asking, "What am I bringing into this pattern? What belief is supporting this outcome? What tiny cause could I set in motion today that points in a different direction?" Even a small change in thought, action, or boundary can alter the path of the next effect. This principle also exposes how disempowered people become when they're convinced that everything is luck, fate, or someone else's permanent control. If you think you are only ever on the receiving end of life, you're far less likely to take ownership of your inner world or your actions. Cause and effect invites you to see the influence you do have, even inside limitations you didn't choose. Every word you speak is a cause. Every boundary you set, every kindness you offer, every silence you keep, every habit you repeat, they all plant seeds. Some seeds sprout quickly, others take years, and some you may never see. But something is always growing from the causes you set in motion. The more conscious you become of those causes, the less your life feels like a storm, and the more it starts to look like a landscape you're actively shaping. And finally, the Hermetic principle of gender is often misunderstood. Here, gender doesn't refer to modern social identity or biological sex. It points to two complementary forces that appear in everything, one active, directive, outward, the other receptive, intuitive, inward. You can call one the masculine principle and the other the feminine principle, but both live in you regardless of who you are. The active masculine aspect is about clarity, decision, will, and outward movement. It chooses, defines, focuses, and acts. The receptive feminine aspect is about intuition, feeling, imagination, and inward depth. It listens, holds, nurtures, and prepares. Creation requires both. An idea with no action stays a fantasy. Action with no inner alignment becomes empty motion. You see this play out in your own life constantly. When you sit quietly, reflect, listen to your gut, or allow an insight to surface, you're in the receptive mode. When you take that insight, make a decision, and move it into the world with a conversation, a piece of art, a project, or a commitment, you're in the active mode. Inner and outer, feeling and form, seed and soil working together. A culture that glorifies non-stop productivity, domination, and control while dismissing rest, intuition, and feeling tends to overdevelop the active side and starve the receptive side. People become efficient but disconnected, successful on paper, empty on the inside. On the other hand, living only in fantasies, feelings, or endless self-reflection without ever grounding anything in action is another form of imbalance. Dreams never leave the realm of possibility. Hermetic gender is about integration. You receive, then you act. You imagine, then you structure. You feel, then you choose. You let your subconscious mind be impressed with images, emotions, and meanings that match who you're becoming, and then you align your conscious actions with that inner imprint. The subconscious in this model behaves like a receptive field. It doesn't argue. It accepts what you repeatedly feed it, especially when it's charged with emotion and symbolism. Stories, rituals, repeated statements, images, all of these sink below the surface over time. When those inner impressions are paired with consistent, clear action, the two principles work together and creation unfolds. You can even see this in relationships. People often attract partners who mirror the balance or imbalance of these energies within themselves. Someone who disowns their own sensitivity might end up with a partner who expresses it in exaggerated ways. Someone who refuses their own inner strength might repeatedly encounter people who dominate or control them. As you integrate both energies within yourself, your relationships often shift from power struggles into more honest reflections of who you are becoming. In ancient symbolism, the image of a unified being containing both masculine and feminine qualities wasn't about erasing differences. It was about inner wholeness. When you stop searching outside for something to complete you, when you become both the vessel and the spark, you step into a different kind of power. You no longer wait for permission to create. You no longer need constant external validation to feel real. So step back and look at the full picture. Mentalism shows you that your experience is rooted in mind. Correspondence shows you that inner and outer mirror each other. Vibration reminds you that your state is always moving and influencing what you perceive. Polarity reveals that opposites are two ends of the same thing, and that you can move along that spectrum. Rhythm teaches you to work with cycles instead of fighting them. Cause and effect hands you back authorship by showing you how your patterns create outcomes. Gender reveals how creation actually moves through you by uniting inner receptivity with outer action. Taken together, they don't form a religion. They form a lens. Knowing these principles in your head doesn't change anything by itself. You can understand every word and still keep living out the same old scripts. The shift happens when you begin to apply them, when you notice a recurring problem and ask what inner belief it corresponds to, when you feel your mood crash and recognize rhythm instead of condemning yourself, when you catch a familiar spiral of thought and choose a different cause to set in motion, when you balance listening within and acting without. You don't need to become perfect. You don't need to master everything overnight. You need to become willing to see, to observe your own life through these lenses and act on what you discover again and again, until that level of awareness becomes your new baseline. Reality may not be what you were taught. You are not as powerless as you were led to believe. These principles have been operating since the day you were born, whether you knew their names or not. Now you have the language for them. Now you have the map. The real question is what you'll do the next time you catch your reflection in the mirror of your life and realize that the one holding the key, the one writing the script, was never out there. It has been you all along.